They expected silence. Humanity hit like a storm. 5-6 months after the Battle of Seoul, the galaxy had changed. News of humanity's victory spread through the Dominion like fire through dry grass, carried by traders and diplomats and spies who could not believe what they were hearing. A young species had defeated a HFY war fleet. A primitive world had turned back the might of an empire. The impossible had happened, and nothing would ever be the same. High Counselor Yethmora sat alone in her private chambers and stared at the reports piled on her desk. She had not slept properly since the survivors returned with their tales of human ferocity. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the tactical recordings of the battle. Human ships diving through plasma fire. Human crews fighting to the death rather than surrendering. Human commanders making decisions with a speed and precision that defied everything the Dominion knew about primitive species. She had options. She could send the full armada, 500 ships that would overwhelm any defense the humans could mount. She could glass their world and end the threat permanently. The Dominion had done this before with species that grew too dangerous to tolerate. But the whispers had already begun. Other civilizations under Dominion observation were watching. Species that had been classified as quiet extinction candidates for centuries were suddenly asking questions. If the humans could resist, could they resist too? If the humans could fight back, what was stopping them from doing the same? The Dominion's power had always rested on the assumption that resistance was futile. The humans had proven that assumption wrong. War with humanity would be expensive. Even if the Dominion won, which was no longer certain, the cost in ships and soldiers would weaken their hold on the rest of the galaxy. Other species might see an opportunity. Rebellions might spark across multiple systems simultaneously. The empire that had stood for 10,000 years could crumble in a matter of decades. Yethmora was old enough to know that empires did not fall from external attacks. They fell from internal rot. They fell when their subjects stopped believing in their invincibility. They fell when the cost of maintaining control exceeded the benefits of holding power. The humans had given her subjects a reason to hope. That was more dangerous than any fleet. She called for her diplomatic corps and gave them new instructions. The Dominion would negotiate. Lisa Murray received the message 3 weeks later. The Dominion was requesting a meeting in neutral space to discuss terms. They were not offering surrender, but they were offering recognition. Humanity would be acknowledged as a sovereign civilization with full rights under galactic law. In exchange, the Dominion expected certain guarantees. Lisa read the terms carefully. The HFY wanted assurance that humanity would not share their military technology with other species under Dominion observation. They wanted humanity to remain within their own solar system for at least 100 years. They wanted the captured HFY crews returned unharmed. Paul Grant stood beside her as she considered the offer. He had been with her through every moment of the past 6 months, helping to coordinate the defense, managing the diplomatic channels, keeping her sane when the weight of command threatened to crush her. His opinion mattered more than most. She asked him what he thought. Paul was quiet for a long moment before answering. He said that accepting these terms would save lives. Thousands of human lives that would be lost in another battle. Millions of HFY lives that would be spent trying to conquer a world that would never stop fighting. The practical choice was clear, but he also said that other species were watching. Species that had been written off as extinct candidates, just like humanity. Species that might never have another chance to break free from Dominion control. By agreeing not to share their technology, humanity would be leaving those species to face the same fate that had been planned for Earth. Lisa understood the weight of that choice. She had spent her entire life preparing to fight for humanity's survival. She had never thought about what came after. She had never considered that her decisions might affect species she had never met, worlds she had never seen, civilizations that were just beginning to hope. She made her decision. The steady hand traveled to neutral space alone, carrying Lisa and a small diplomatic team. The meeting point was an abandoned station orbiting a dead star, far from any inhabited system. Yethmora arrived with her own delegation. Ancient Velthari, who had negotiated treaties before humanity's ancestors learned to walk upright. The two leaders sat across from each other at a simple table in a room that smelled of dust and forgotten years. Lisa looked at the High Counselor and saw someone who had ruled an empire for 3 centuries. Yethmora looked at Lisa and saw someone who had led her people through their darkest hour at 34 years old. Neither of them flinched. Lisa presented humanity's counterterms. They would accept recognition and remain within their solar system for 100 years. They would return the captured crews, but they would not promise to keep silent while other species were left to die under Dominion observation. They would not pretend they were alone in their defiance. Yethmora considered the terms. She could reject them and continue the war. She could spend centuries trying to crush a species that refused to stay crushed. Or she could accept that the galaxy was changing whether she liked it or not. She chose pragmatism. The Treaty of Soul was signed on a cold day in a forgotten corner of the universe. It was not a perfect document. It satisfied no one completely, but it ended the immediate threat of annihilation and gave humanity time to grow stronger. Keth-NOL spoke at the signing ceremony. He had spent 6 months among the humans, learning their ways, understanding their strange combination of ferocity and compassion. He told the assembled delegates what he had witnessed during the battle. He told them about crews who sacrificed themselves for their companions. He told them about commanders who wept for their fallen enemies. He told them about a species that could have destroyed him but chose to talk instead. The humans are not like us, he said. They are not like anyone we have ever encountered. They fight with the fury of predators and the mercy of saints. They are capable of terrible violence and incredible kindness in the same breath. I do not fully understand them, but I believe they will change everything. The ceremony ended and the delegations departed. Lisa returned to Earth aboard the Steady Hand, watching the stars drift past her window as her ship carried her home. Paul sat beside her in comfortable silence, neither of them needing words to communicate what they felt. They arrived at Earth on a spring morning. Lisa took her shuttle down to the surface and walked through streets that were still being rebuilt after the battle. She found a small park near the landing site, where children were playing on swings and climbing on structures that had been built from salvaged ship parts. They laughed and shouted and chased each other without any understanding of how close they had come to never existing at all. Paul joined her on a bench overlooking the park. He asked her what came next. Lisa watched a little girl with brown hair climb to the top of a structure made from the hull plating of a destroyed destroyer. The child raised her arms in triumph and shouted something that made her friends laugh. She had no idea that she was standing on the remains of a ship that had given everything to protect her future. We show them what we can do when we are not afraid, Lisa said. We build, we explore. We reach out to the species the Dominion abandoned. We prove that silence is not the only answer to fear. She stood up and looked at the sky. Ships were rising toward orbit, carrying the first human traders and explorers into the wider galaxy. 50 years of silence had ended. A new era was beginning. Humanity had expected nothing from the universe. The universe had expected nothing from humanity. Both had been wrong. The storm had passed, but the thunder would echo forever. They expected silence. Humanity hit like a storm. Part 4, the Velthari War. Fleet entered the human solar system like a tide of death rolling through the void. 40 vessels arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the pale light of distant stars. Each ship was a masterpiece of Dominion engineering, built to conquer worlds and crush resistance wherever it was found. Their commander, Fleet Admiral Vethkol, stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched Earth grow larger on his screens. He expected this to be simple. A primitive species with primitive weapons defending a single world against the might of an empire that spanned 400 star systems. The mathematics were clear. The outcome was inevitable. He would destroy the human fleet, bombard their cities from orbit, and return home before the season changed on Keth Prime. Then his sensors began screaming. The asteroid belt came alive. Weapons platforms that had been dormant for decades suddenly powered up, their targeting systems locking onto the Valkyrie formation. Mars revealed shipyards hidden beneath its rusty surface, and fresh human vessels began launching into the void. The space around Earth itself bristled with defense. Stations that emerged from disguised debris. Fields like predators rising from the deep. Vethkol stared at his tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: doubt. Humans had not simply built a fleet. They had turned their entire solar system into a fortress. Every asteroid could hide a weapon. Every moon could conceal a base. Every piece of floating debris might be a missile waiting to strike. He gave the order to advance anyway. The Dominion had not conquered 400 star systems by retreating at the first sign of resistance. His ships were still superior. His crews were still better trained. Numbers and technology would carry the day. As they always had, Admiral Kevin Shaw watched the Valkyrie fleet approach from the command station Armstrong, positioned at the exact point between Earth and its moon, where gravity held everything in perfect balance. He was 63 years old, a veteran of countless simulations who had never fired a shot in actual combat. None of them had. Humanity had been at peace for generations, focusing all their energy on preparation rather than war. But they had prepared well. Shaw opened a channel to his fleet. His voice was calm, almost gentle, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the survival of his entire species. He reminded his people what they were fighting for. Not territory, not resources, not glory or conquest. They were fighting for the children in the underground schools who had never seen the sun. They were fighting for the parents who had given up their lives above ground so their descendants could have a future. They were fighting for every human being who had sacrificed something so that humanity can have this chance. The first shots came from the asteroid belt. Human railguns fired projectiles at velocities the Valkyrie had never encountered. Chunks of metal accelerating to fractions of light speed through magnetic coils that stretched for kilometers. The projectiles struck Valkyrie shields and punched through them like needles through cloth. 3 ships died in the opening seconds, their hulls torn apart by kinetic force alone. Vethkol ordered a counterattack, but his weapons struggled to find targets. The human ships were smaller and more maneuverable than Dominion vessels, darting between asteroids and debris with a precision that seemed almost impossible. Every time his gunners locked onto a target, it disappeared behind cover or changed direction so sharply that the tracking systems lost it entirely. Lisa Murray led a strike force of 8 destroyers directly at the Valkyrie flagship. Her pilots flew in a formation so tight that enemy sensors sometimes registered them as a single vessel. They moved together without verbal communication, anticipating each other's actions through years of shared training and absolute trust. Her tactical officer, a woman named Grace Park, called out targets and threats in a steady stream of information. Lisa processed it all without conscious thought, her hands moving across the controls as if the ship were an extension of her own body. She had trained for this moment since she was old enough to hold a controller. Every nerve, every muscle, every instinct had been shaped for this single purpose. The steady hand dove through a gap in the Valkyrie formation and unleashed a volley of missiles at point-blank range. The flagship shields flared and flickered under the assault. 2 more human destroyers followed through the same gap, adding their firepower to the attack. The Valkyrie vessel shuddered and began to list. smoke and debris streaming from wounds in its hull, but the enemy was not helpless. Valkyrie plasma cannons found their marks, burning through human armor and vaporizing crew compartments. Ships that Lisa had served beside for years disappeared in flashes of light and expanding clouds of wreckage. Every loss was a friend. Every explosion was a family destroyed. She did not let herself grieve. There would be time for that later, if they survived. Right now, there was only the mission, only the fight, only the desperate need to protect the world that hung blue and beautiful in the void behind her. The battle raged for hours. Human ships fell. Valkyrie ships fell. The solar system filled with debris and radiation and the screaming signals of dying vessels. Admiral Shaw coordinated the defense from Armstrong, shifting forces to meet each new threat, sacrificing pieces of his fleet to protect more valuable assets. The turning point came when a squadron of human frigates executed a maneuver that no Valkyrie commander would have considered possible. They flew directly into the exhaust stream of a Dominion cruiser, using the enemy's own engines as cover while they positioned themselves for a killing shot. The cruiser's crew never saw the attack coming. One moment they were firing at human positions. The next moment their ship was breaking apart around them. Vethkol watched his fleet crumble and finally gave the order to retreat. 23 of his 40 ships were destroyed or disabled. 12 more had been captured by human boarding parties that fought with terrifying efficiency in close quarters. Only 5 vessels escaped the solar system, fleeing back toward Dominion space with tales of impossible human ferocity. Kethnal watched the battle from the observation deck of the Steady Hand. He had been given permission to witness the engagement, though he did not understand why. Perhaps the humans wanted him to see. Perhaps they wanted him to tell the Dominion what he had witnessed. He watched human ships sacrifice themselves to protect their companions. He watched crews fight to the last breath rather than surrender. He watched commanders make decisions in fractions of a second that would have taken a Valkyrie council hours to debate. And he finally understood what the Dominion had missed. Humans did not fear death. They feared something far worse. They feared failing each other. They feared being the one who let their family down. They feared surviving when their companions did not. That fear made them more dangerous than any weapon. It made them unstoppable. Lisa returned to Armstrong after the battle, her ship scarred and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds. She walked through corridors filled with exhausted crew members and wounded soldiers and bodies wrapped in white sheets. The cost had been terrible. Thousands dead, dozens of ships destroyed. An entire generation of warriors spent in a single day, but they had won. Earth still stood. Humanity still existed. The storm had broken against them, and they had not fallen. She found Admiral Shaw standing at a window, looking down at the planet below. His eyes were red and his hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "They will come back," he said, "with more ships, more weapons, more determination." Lisa stood beside him and looked at the same view. Earth in the void, blue and green and white, beautiful and fragile, and worth every drop of blood they had spilled to protect it. "Then we will be ready," she said. "We have done the impossible once. We can do it again." They expected silence. Humanity hit like a storm part. 3. The Dominion Council chamber on Keth Prime was older than most civilizations. Its walls were carved from stone that had been quarried before humans learned to make fire, and its ceiling rose so high that shadows gathered there like living things. High Counselor Yethmora sat at the center of the great curved table and listened to the reports with growing unease. The whisper of ending had been captured. All 12 crew members were in human custody. The confirmation mission had become a disaster of unprecedented proportions. Yethmora was old even by Valkyrie standards, her skin pale and thin like paper stretched over ancient bones. She had ruled the Dominion for 3 centuries, guiding her people through wars and plagues and the slow expansion of their empire across 400 star systems. She had seen young species rise and fall more times than she could count. She had ordered the destruction of worlds that pose threats to Velthari supremacy. She had never hesitated before, but this situation was different. This situation made no sense. The humans should have been extinct. Every model, every prediction, every piece of data collected over 2 centuries pointed to the same conclusion. A species that discovered nuclear weapons before achieving interstellar travel was doomed. It was a mathematical certainty. The Dominion had watched it happen hundreds of times. There was no reason to believe humanity would be different. And yet, here they were. Not only alive but armed. Not only surviving but thriving in secret. Building a fleet right under the noses of Velthari, observers without anyone noticing. How? That was the question that burned in Yethmora's mind. How had they done it? A senior advisor, a male named Kothvel, presented the intelligence analysis. The humans had detected Velthari observation probes in their system approximately 50 years ago. Rather than announcing this discovery or attempting to make contact, they had chosen to hide. They had systematically eliminated all outgoing signals from their world. They had moved their industrial capacity underground and into space, building ships and weapons in places the Dominion never thought to look. They had sacrificed 2 generations of normal development to prepare for this moment. Yethmora struggled to comprehend such thinking. The Velthari lived for thousands of years. 50 years was nothing to them, barely worth noticing. But humans lived less than a century on average. 50 years was most of a human lifetime. They had given up more than half their existence just to surprise the Dominion. What kind of species did that? What kind of madness drove a people to sacrifice so much for a single moment of advantage? Kothvel continued his report. The human ships were primitive by Velthari standards, using chemical propulsion and magnetic weapons rather than the gravity drives and plasma cannons of the Dominion fleet. But they were numerous and they were effective. The humans had learned to work with limited resources, building efficient machines that did exactly what they needed and nothing more. Their technology was not elegant, but it was deadly. And there was something else. The humans fought differently than any species the Dominion had encountered. They did not rely on telepathy or hive mind connections to coordinate their movements. They used something far more primitive and far more resilient. They called it trust. Human crews trained together for years, sometimes decades. They learned each other's habits and instincts until they could predict what their companions would do without any communication at all. They fought as families rather than soldiers, protecting each other with a ferocity that bordered on irrational. When one human was threatened, others would sacrifice themselves without hesitation to save them. Yethmora did not understand this behavior. The Velthari were logical beings who calculated costs and benefits before every action. Sacrificing one life to save another of equal value made no mathematical sense. Yet the humans did it constantly, instinctively, as if the very concept of letting a companion die was unthinkable. She called for recommendations from her council. The responses were divided. Some advisors argued for immediate military action. Send the war fleet. Destroy the human ships. Glass their planet and end the threat before it could grow. The Dominion had done this before with species that showed signs of becoming dangerous. It was unpleasant but necessary. Others counseled caution. The humans had hidden their capabilities for 50 years. What else might they be hiding? What other surprises might they have prepared? A direct assault could be walking into a trap. Yethmora listened to both sides and made her decision. She would send a war fleet, but not the full armada. 40 ships should be more than enough to handle a species that had only recently achieved interstellar capability. If the humans had more defenses hidden somewhere, 40 ships would discover them. If they did not, 40 ships would end them. She gave the order personally, her ancient voice carrying across the council chamber with the weight of 3 centuries of authority. The human world was to be destroyed. Their ships were to be eliminated. Their species was to be erased from existence before they could become a genuine threat to Dominion supremacy. The war fleet departed within days. Aboard the Steady Hand, Lisa Murray received the intelligence report from her deep space sensors and felt her heart grow cold. 40 Valkyrie warships were approaching the solar system. They would arrive in approximately 3 weeks. Their weapons were more advanced than anything humanity possessed. Their shields were stronger. Their ships were faster. On paper, the battle was already lost. Paul Grant stood beside her in the command center, reading the same report. His face was pale, but his voice was steady when he spoke. He asked what they were going to do. Lisa looked at him for a long moment before answering. She thought about her parents and their generation, who had given up the sky so their children could have a chance. She thought about the 50 years of sacrifice, the hidden cities, the secret shipyards, the countless lives spent preparing for this exact moment. "We fight," she said. "We have been preparing for this our entire lives. Every drill, every simulation, every sleepless night. This is what it was all for." She opened a channel to the fleet. Her voice carried across the solar system to every ship, every station, every man and woman who had dedicated their lives to humanity's survival. The enemy was coming, she told them. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But they had something the Valkyrie did not have. They had each other. They had trust. They had 50 years of planning and preparation. And they had absolutely nothing left to lose. The storm was coming, and humanity would meet it head-on. They expected silence. Humanity hit like a storm. Part 2. The Valkyrie confirmation vessel, Whisper of Ending, glided through the outer reaches of the human solar system like a ghost passing through a graveyard. Kethnal stood on the observation deck and watched the distant planets drift past, cold and lifeless against a backdrop of stars. Neptune hung in the void like a pale blue jewel, beautiful and empty. Just like every other dead system the Dominion had surveyed over the millennia, he had made this journey many times before. Different systems, different species, but always the same ending. He would arrive at a world that had once held promise, document the ruins of a civilization that had destroyed itself, and return home with another entry for the Great Archive. The Valkyrie had been collecting these stories for 10,000 years. Earth would be just another chapter in a very long book. The captain of the Whisper of Ending was a female named Veth Sora. She was young for a Valkyrie, barely 3 centuries old, and she approached this mission with the casual boredom of someone who had seen it all before. The humans were dead, she had said when they departed. Everyone knew it. This was just paperwork. Kethnal had agreed with her then. He was not so sure now. Something felt wrong. He could not explain it, could not point to any single piece of evidence that justified his unease. The readings were exactly what he expected. No radio signals, no energy signatures, no signs of active technology anywhere in the system. Earth was dark and quiet, just like every other extinct world. But the silence felt different somehow. It felt deliberate. He pushed the thought aside. He was being foolish. Primitive species did not go silent on purpose. They went silent because they were dead. There was no other explanation. The Dominion had watched thousands of civilizations rise and fall, and not one of them had ever chosen silence voluntarily. It simply did not happen. The Whisper of Ending passed the orbit of Neptune and continued inward. The inner planets grew larger on the screens. Mars and Earth and Venus hanging in the void like stones waiting to be turned over. Kethnal watched them approach and felt his unease grow stronger with each passing hour. Then the sensors screened. Veth Sora was on her feet in an instant. her calm demeanor shattered by the sudden alarm. The screens around her flickered and changed, filling with data that should not have existed. Heat signatures, energy readings, movement in the asteroid field ahead. Dozens of contacts appearing from nowhere, surrounding the whisper of ending in a perfect sphere of destruction. Ke to -NOL stared at the display and felt his blood turn cold. Ships, human ships. 12 of them, emerging from asteroids that had seemed completely dead moments before. They were not large by Veltari standards, but they were armed. He could see the weapon ports glowing with power, the missile tubes opening along their hulls, the railguns tracking the whisper of ending with mechanical precision. This was impossible. The humans were supposed to be extinct. They were supposed to be dead. The Dominion had watched them for 200 years, and they had never shown any sign of this capability. Where had these ships come from? How had they hidden for so long? Why had they hidden at all? The communications console crackled with static, and then a voice filled the observation deck. It was a female voice, calm and controlled, speaking in a language that the Veltari translation system struggled to process. The words came slowly, carefully, as if the speaker knew she was making history. "You watched us for 200 years," the voice said. "You expected us to die. We did not. Now we will talk." Vetsora reached for the weapons console, but Kethnol grabbed her arm and stopped her. Their weapons were minimal, designed for defense against space debris, not combat. The human ships would destroy them in seconds if they tried to fight. Their only chance was to comply. The human commander identified herself as Lisa Murray of the Earth vessel. Steady hand. She gave them simple instructions. Power down weapons. Allow boarding parties. Resist and die. The choice was theirs. Ve Sora wanted to run. The whisper of ending was fast enough to escape if they acted quickly. But Kethnol shook his head. The humans had surrounded them completely. There was no direction they could flee that would not take them directly through the firing arc of at least 3 enemy ships. Running would be suicide. They powered down their weapons and waited. The human boarding party arrived within the hour. Kethnol watched them enter through the airlock and felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. He had studied humans his entire career, but he had never seen one in person. They were smaller than he expected, shorter than the average Veltari by nearly a full meter. Their bodies were compact and dense, built for a world with heavier gravity than most species could tolerate. The leader of the boarding party was a male with dark hair and steady eyes. He introduced himself as Paul Grant, diplomatic officer of the Steady Hand. His movements were careful and controlled, showing no aggression, but also no fear. He looked at the Veltari crew as if they were interesting specimens rather than enemies. Kethnol was escorted off the whisper of ending and taken aboard the human destroyer. He expected to be thrown into a cell, interrogated, perhaps tortured for information. That was what the Dominion would have done with captured aliens. That was what any sensible species would do. Instead, he was taken to comfortable quarters with a soft bed and a window that looked out at the stars. A translation device was provided so he could communicate more easily. Food was brought, strange human dishes that tasted better than he expected. No one struck him or threatened him or treated him with anything other than polite professionalism. Lisa Murray came to see him that evening. She was taller than most of the other humans, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to see right through him. She sat across from him in a simple chair and studied him for a long moment before speaking. She explained that humanity wanted answers. They wanted to know why the Veltari had watched them for 2 centuries without making contact. They wanted to know what the Dominion planned to do with their world. They wanted to understand the rules of a galaxy they had only just learned they were part of. Kethnol asked why they had not simply destroyed the whisper of ending. It would have been easier, safer, No witnesses to report back to the Dominion. Lisa smiled at him then, a small expression that changed her entire face. "Destroying your ship would have told the Dominion we are afraid," she said. Capturing it tells them something else entirely. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars that humanity had hidden from 50 years. Kethnal watched her and realized he had made a terrible mistake. Everyone in the Dominion had made a terrible mistake. These creatures were not primitive. They had never been primitive. They had been patient. They had been planning. And now they were ready. The storm had arrived. They expected silence. Humanity hit like a storm part. One senior observer, Kethnal, stood before the viewing screen aboard the Velthary observation vessel Endless Watch and stared at the small blue planet, rotating slowly in the darkness. Earth, the humans called it. Such a simple name for a world that had once shown so much promise. He placed his long fingers against the screen and felt nothing but cold glass. The planet below was equally cold now, he assumed. Cold and dead and silent. 200 years the Velthary Dominion had watched this world. 200 years of patient observation, recording every broadcast, every satellite launch, every nuclear test. Kethnal had inherited this assignment from his predecessor, who had inherited it from another before him. Watching primitive species destroy themselves was not exciting work, but it was necessary work. The Dominion needed to know which worlds would rise and which would fall. Earth had been classified as a quiet extinction candidate since the humans detonated their first nuclear weapons in 1945. The Velthary had seen this pattern hundreds of times before. A young species discovers the power of the atom, builds weapons capable of destroying their own world, and then does exactly that. Sometimes it took decades. Sometimes it took centuries. But the result was always the same: silence. And now Earth had gone silent. Keth-NOL pulled up the communication logs on his console. For over a century, Earth had been loud. Radio signals, television broadcasts, satellite communications, all of it flooding into space like a beacon announcing their existence to anyone who cared to listen. The humans had been careless in that way. They did not know they were being watched, and they did not seem to care. They shouted into the void as if they wanted to be found. But 50 years ago, the signals began to fade. First, the military communications went dark. Then the commercial broadcasts. Then, even the simple radio waves that had leaked from their cities and towns. One by one, the voices of Earth fell silent until nothing remained but the background hum of a dead world. Keth-NO had seen this before too. Species that realized too late what they had done. Species that retreated underground in their final days, hiding from the radiation and the poison they had unleashed upon themselves. The silence was not peace. The silence was extinction. He began composing his final report. Earth, Catalog Designation 7749C, Human Dominant Species. Status, Presumed Extinct. Cause, Self-inflicted nuclear or environmental collapse. Recommendation, remove from active observation list. Schedule planetary survey in 500 years to confirm extinction and assess resource potential. His fingers moved across the console with practiced ease. He had written this report many times for many worlds. The words came easily now. There was no sadness in them, no regret. The Dominion did not mourn failed species. They simply recorded them and moved on. That was the way of things. The strong survived. The weak perished. The Velthary watched and documented and kept their distance. Interference was forbidden. The Dominion had learned that lesson long ago. Young species needed to prove themselves worthy of contact by surviving on their own. Those who could not survive did not deserve to reach the stars. It was harsh, but it was fair. The galaxy had no room for weakness. KETH-NOL transmitted his report to the Dominion Council and requested a confirmation. Vessel be sent to Earth. Standard. Procedure required visual documentation of an extinction event before a world could be officially removed from the observation list. He expected the confirmation vessel would find ruins, broken cities, poisoned oceans, perhaps a few survivors hiding in caves, waiting for death. The same story told on 1,000 dead worlds before this one. He did not expect anything else. Far across the solar system, hidden inside a hollowed asteroid that the Velthary had never thought to scan. Commander Lisa Murray read the intercepted transmission and smiled. The observation room aboard the destroyer, Steadyhand, was small and cramped, filled with screens and consoles that glowed with soft blue light. Lisa stood at the center of it all, surrounded by her senior officers, and felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. 50 years. 50 years of silence and secrecy and sacrifice. 50 years of building in the shadows while the Velthary watched and waited for humanity to die. And now, finally, the moment had come. Lisa was 42 years old. She had been born into the silence, raised in underground cities where the stars were pictures on screens rather than lights in the sky. She had never known a world where humanity shouted into the void without fear. She had only known the quiet, the preparation, the waiting. Her parents had been among the first to discover the alien probes orbiting Earth. Scientists working on a deep space telescope had found them in 2089. Small objects that should not have existed, watching and recording everything humanity did. The discovery had changed everything. Within a year, the United Earth Council had formed. Within 5 years, the decision had been made. Humanity would go dark. They would stop broadcasting. They would hide their true capabilities. And they would build. The Velthary expected silence because silence meant death. They could not imagine any other reason for a species to stop talking. They could not imagine patience. They could not imagine planning. They could not imagine a species that would sacrifice 50 years of normal life to prepare for a single moment of revelation. But that was exactly what humanity had done. Lisa looked at the fleet status display on the main screen. 12 warships hidden in asteroids throughout the solar system. Weapons platforms concealed in the rings of Saturn. Shipyards buried beneath the surface of Mars. Defense stations orbiting Earth itself, disguised as debris and dead satellites. All of it built in secret. All of it waiting. Her communications officer, a young man named Danny Cole, looked up from his console. His eyes were bright with excitement and fear. A confirmation vessel was coming, he said. 12 crew members. Minimal weapons. They expected to find a graveyard. Lisa nodded slowly. She had trained for this moment her entire life. Every simulation, every drill, every sleepless night had led to this. The Velthary were coming to document humanity's extinction. Instead, they would witness humanity's emergence. She opened a channel to the rest of the fleet. Her voice was calm and steady as she spoke, carrying across the void to the men and women who had waited just as long as she had. The time had come, she told them. 50 years of silence ended today. They would intercept the Velthary vessel. They would not destroy it. They would capture it. Humanity needed to send a message, and that message was simple. We are not dead. We were never dying. We were waiting. And now you will listen. The officers around her straightened in their seats. Danny's hands moved across his console, transmitting coordinates and orders to the rest of the fleet. The steady hand hummed with power as her engines began to warm. Lisa turned back to the viewing screen and stared at the distant sun, a tiny point of light in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, a Velthary ship was approaching, expecting to find silence and ruins and death. They would find something else entirely. They would find humanity, and humanity would hit like a storm.